Yes, so today, yes, we're going to dive into some of these poems that I've translated in this book. And I'm going to give a little bit of a background on the poet that we know as Rumi. Since we started here with a bit on his name, I'll say that he was born Muhammad ibn Hussein Balkhi, and he's known throughout the Middle East as Molana, which means our sage, our master. And he was basically nicknamed Rumi. I don't think he was ever called Rumi in his lifetime. And Rum means of room. Rumi means of room, which is a part of Anatolia where he spent much of his life in present day Turkey. Though he was born, it seems, in either present day Afghanistan, in Balkh, or right near it in Vakhsh, which is in present day Tajikistan. In any case, they're very, very close by. And he and his family migrated across the Middle East, both because they were interested, his father was interested in leaving Balkh, but also partly because they were evading the Mongol invasion. This was the 13th century. So the Mongols were basically marching across Central Asia, plundering villages, and Rumi and his family, or I'm going to call him Rumi, sometimes Molana. Molana is what I heard him called throughout my childhood, but I'm so used to calling him Rumi that I do that, and I know that that's how he's known. And I would like to say something about his relationship to his name and to the idea of namelessness, which is binami in Persian. Binami means the state of namelessness, which is something that he actually longed for, aimed for, this state of dissolution, of selflessness, where name, title, rank, prestige, all of this stuff is irrelevant. And he is one with the divine, one with the great unfathomable life force. He is egoless. This is sort of the goal of the mystic, right? Is to lose the self and become the true self, which is the self connected to the unfathomable source. And so when he says, I am nobody, 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 or when he says to his teacher, I'm not an idol, because he was very famous. He was a very famous preacher, and I'll get to that in a second, but he was very well known. And when his teacher or his guide, his mentor, his beloved friend, Shams of Tabriz, came into his life around the age of 38, this man was a mystic. This man was not interested in any of the hierarchies. He was really interested in walking the talk, the mystical philosophy, and encouraging Maulana Rumi to basically put his preaching aside, because he was an Islamic preacher, and speak from his own voice. He wanted him to uncover his own voice. He actually says that to him. And we hear those quotes in his lectures when he talks to Rumi's disciples later. But anyway, he was really the one who pushed the button and allowed Maulana Rumi to become the poet we know him to be. So it seems that he only started writing poetry around the age of 40. And at a certain point, Shams, who was partly his coach too, said to him, you're a candle at the gathering. You're an idol to your fans. And Rumi said, I'm no candle. I'm no idol. I'm no candle. I'm the scattering of smoke. So this, again, this idea of this dissolution, this namelessness, when he says in one of the poems, colorless, nameless, free, that's what I am. This is sort of also, this is the voice of the soul speaking in this poem. So in the Sufi tradition, there's this word nafs, and in the Islamic tradition and Sufi, when I say Sufi, I mean the mystical branch of Islam. This word nafs means the spectrum from self, from the stifled false self, the persona, the one attached to persona, to the soul. So how does one move along this spectrum in a lifetime? This is the Sufi path, to go from nafsa amara, which is the stifled self, obsessed with self-preservation, often prone to greed, to pride, to lust for dominion, how to move from nafs ammara to nafs lawama, which is the sometimes translated as the blaming self, but I don't like that translation. This is the self that is able to look at itself in the mirror and say, maybe I can do a little bit of tweaking here. Maybe there's room to grow. Maybe there's room to shed, or maybe I have the desire to shed some of these stifling attributes, some of these oppressive attributes of nafsa amara, and move into a more compassionate state of existence, in a state of existence more featuring a lot more gratitude, presence. Ganja huzur means the treasure of presence. So this nafs mutmaina, which is kind of the goal of the Sufi path in a way, is the one that feels itself dissolved, united. It's the soul energy. And, one is not always perhaps in that state of mind, but the more one experiences that silence too, which is so central to that state. Maulana Rumi talks so much about silence. In so many of the poems, he ends with the imperative khamush. Khamush means turn off the mind, turn off the tongue. Silence. It means silence, right? So he's calling us and himself at the end of many poems to silence, and this kind of meditative state in which one can find that spaciousness and also that emptiness, which is another very important word in the Sufi tradition, something that in the Western world we might run from emptiness. But this emptiness is the emptiness that also the Buddhists embrace. This is the emptiness that is free of narrative, again, free of attachments. And there's a peace there. There's a tranquility there. And that emptiness is actually full, right? So the irony that it is actually, that's when grace can come in. That's when the divine can come in. That's when, or one can say coming up from here within. For Maulana Rumi, the divine was within and without, and it was rising up. His teacher said, the secret wisdom, Shams of Tabriz, who he loved so much, Shams of Tabriz said, the secret wisdom is this: the sea of compassion wants to rise within you. So one can think of this as also a divine attribute, this compassion, this shoreless, boundless love that he talks about, the capital L love, the 360 embrace of creation love, the acceptance, the compassionate witness aspect of the self as being a kind of salvation from the difficulties of life, which is something that Rumi never denies, or enables us to live this life with strength, because what in a way is strength but the ability to find that tranquility and act from there, even in the face of challenge and chaos. That's one way of defining strength. So Maulana Rumi speaks a lot to these topics in the poems. And as I was saying, going back to the historical background, they traveled across the Middle East. He was around the age of 9. His father was an Islamic theologian. His grandfather was an Islamic theologian. So he was born into a line of preachers. And from a very early age, he was praying, he was fasting, and well-versed in so many different schools of learning, of astronomy and mathematics and science and religious studies. And he knew Persian folk tales. And so much of this appears in his poetry. And as they were traversing the Middle East with a caravan at certain times, a caravan of 300 people, sometimes, one can only imagine the stories that were being exchanged, perhaps the songs that were being sung, sleeping under the stars, the sky 800 years ago brimming with stars, the orchards very, very fragrant. And also he had the awareness of war and the Mongol invasion. So he had such an awareness of the again, another spectrum, the spectrum of human existence, of possible experience on this earth, of the horrors of war and of the actual the ecstatic connection to nature and connection to mystical thought and revelation, which was a kind of wine to him, you know. So all of this appears too in his poetry. He had such a rich childhood, and that actually, you know, shows up. And eventually they landed in present-day Turkey, and he ended up taking over his father's role as a theologian after his father passed away, and after he went to Syria for 7 years to study more. Then he came back, and people loved him. He was magnetic, he was charming, he was eloquent, and they began to call him Molana, our sage, our master, and that name never died. In terms of one of the forms that he would write in, the ghazal form, it's a series of couplets, and many of the poems in here are from the Divan Shams of Tabriz, which contains ghazals and quatrains. And the ghazals are a series of couplets with a refrain. So there's a repeating word or phrase that ends every couplet. And in the final couplet, the poet often signs off, says their name. So if it's Hafez, he'll write Hafez and he'll say something. Say a line, or Attar, Sadi. Maulana Rumi never put his name, never, in the over 3,000 ghazals that he wrote, he never once put his own name. And again, there is his, you know, testament, is a testament to how much he longed for this state of namelessness and lived in that state of egolessness. He would often put his teacher's name. And he said that this teacher, this one, Shams of Tabriz, who came into his life when he was 38, when he was at the apex of his career as a preacher, this man, Shams of Tabriz, was his portal to revelation. He says, Yar mara qar mara, friend, cave. When he says cave, that's a big word, because in this context, you know, we know that the Muhammad heard the revelations from Gabriel in the cave. So when he says cave, this is saying very clearly, you are my portal to revelation, Shams of Tabriz, who invited him to let go of the concerns that were so common among the scholarly and religious milieu of the time. Who is where on the ladder, the hierarchy? Shams didn't care about that. He said, let them smear your good name. You'll have less to guard. He wanted Maulana Rumi to experience a radical freedom. Let them smear your good name. You'll have less to guard. So go, he said to him. He told him, go to the Jewish neighborhood where they're making wine, because they weren't making wine in the Muslim neighborhood. It was haram, it was forbidden. So he said, go to the Jewish neighborhood, buy wine, walk home with it, and let everyone see. This would be, you know, it was blasphemous for a sheikh and someone of such stature in the Muslim community to be walking with wine like this. But he did this. This was another way for Shams, challenging him to let go of any concerns with what people were thinking of him, right? With where his name was, what was it in people's minds? Let go of that. Let go of all of it, and tell me, channel. Really, he invited him to channel. He said, dance, whirl. Then he taught him whirling, which is a deeply intense and profound meditative practice that requires motor coordination and focus, deep focus. And of course, when one is in such a state of focus, the mind tends to be quiet. It has to, right? In order to really and go deep into this focus. And he would experience trance state. And he had one hand towards the heavens, one hand towards the earth, a kind of conduit, right? And he's turning towards his heart in a 360 embrace of creation. And in this state of listening to music while whirling, And listening to the drum, the beat of the drum, he started spontaneously composing poetry. That's not to say that he wasn't composing outside of the whirling dance. He was. His first poems that we know of, and we do think that they really are his first written poems, were the ghazals, the calling Shams back because Shams left. He was driven away by jealous disciples. So he was calling him back through poems. And those seem to be the first ones, at least they're the first ones we know of. And then Shams came back, and then they went deep into the practice of whirling dance, deep into the practice of listening to music, which was considered by many of the mullahs of the time to be a distraction, if not a sin. So again, this was a radical act. Let's say by many of the conservative ones, not all of them thought this, but the conservative ones found it at best a distraction and at worst a sin. But Shams said, no, music also is our way to the divine. Listening deeply is our way to the divine. Listen to the silence, listen to the birds, and many, many times Maulana Rumi calls us to this. The first word of his 6-volume ode to liberation is Beshno, listen. And he's not saying listen to me, right? He says listen to the ney, that reed flute. So Shams was a rebel, and Rumi eventually was a rebel too. And it was in this state that he began to write and compose. And I'll share some poems now. For 40 years, my mind drowned me in thought. When love hooked me like a fish, I leapt out of my mind. See how the fruit is trapped, first by its seed, then by its husk. See how I was trapped, first by circumspection, then by calculation. Like a fig split open, my seeds are bare. Our first meal on earth begins with blood and ends with milk. When my mind grew teeth, I craved more than milk. I chased my daily bread with a net, a mask, a bag of tricks. When the soul of souls caught me, nourished me, I shed my trickster's skin. Silence, no more details. I had enough of my own fever. I leapt free. In this poem, when he says, see how I was trapped first by circumspection, then by calculation. In another poem, he says, I was once in a prison of circumspection and calculation. So this circumspection and calculation, this is part of that nafs amara, that calculating egoic mind, which is not nearly as generative, fun, relaxed, compassionate as this soul energy over here, nafs mutmaina, as this free, I leapt free, right? And he entered the ecstatic. His poetry so often is an invitation to us to exhale, and to listen and to breathe in and experience the sensual existence, to listen to the nightingales, as he says so often. He says in another poem that is kind of a contrast, showing this contrast between this ego energy and this soul energy. He says, full of yourself, a friend's touch is sharp as a thorn. A buzzing fly drives you mad. Full of yourself, a friend's touch is sharp as a thorn. A buzzing fly drives you mad. Forget yourself, and what friend can harm you, can hurt you? You mingle with wild elephants and enjoy the ride. Caged in self, you drown in anguish. Storm clouds swallow the sun. Your lover flees the scene. Outside yourself, the night is moonlit. Lovers drink love's wine. It flows through you. Self-conscious, you're dry as autumn leaves. You bite like frost. Melt yourself, and winter's frozen meadows will become spring's fragrant fields. And there he is speaking, of course, of the internal landscape, because this is what the Sufis are so concerned with, and so inviting us to examine and tweak, right? He says, melt yourself and winter's frozen meadows will become spring's fragrant fields within, right? In the other part, when he says, outside yourself, the night is moonlit. Lovers drink love's wine. It flows through you. And when you are in this state beyond self, you can look at two lovers and you're not thinking jealous. You're not jealous at the moment. Not that there's jealousy is natural, and there's no punishing here. There's no judging here, but just an invitation to a more expansive way of existing, a more delightful way of existing, is to see the lovers drinking love's wine and to actually feel that sensation of ecstasy moving through you. This idea that there is a connection and there is a way to feel this kind of united soul energy sometimes, and not feel like me, you, me versus you, us versus them. You have a lover, I don't, I'm jealous. Ugh, I'm in the cage of anguish, right? Not that this is, and he's very human. He says, he confesses all kinds of feelings. So none of this has judgment to it. It's only invitation to us being honest about the human condition, honest about the human mind, and desiring to live on this earth in a way that is more relaxed and more ecstatic. He says, I saw myself sharp as a thorn. I fled to the softness of petals. I saw myself sour as vinegar. I mixed myself with sugar. An aching eye, seeing through pain, a stewing pot of poison, I was both. Reaching for the antidote, I touched compassion. I touched mercy. I was a cup holding only the dregs. I poured in the water of life. Raw and callow, I followed the ones already cooked by love's fire. In the dirt on love's path, I found the medicine that ensoul's sight. My armor thinned to a silken scrim, I sifted the soil that gives vision to the blind. Love said, yes, you have arrived, but don't think it's your doing. I'm wind, you are fire, I stoke your flames. So even after all this movement and all of this growth, still, love says, don't forget, I'm wind, you are fire, I stoke your flames. So now don't get a big head about it. It says, don't think it's your doing. Yes, you've arrived, but don't think it's your doing. It is in concert with this force of love, with this sea of compassion that wants to rise within us, as Shams of Tabriz said. We are working with that love energy, that force, recognizing that it's within us. He believes it's in every cell. He says, liberate yourself from the tyranny of self. Be humble as soil, and you will see each particle of soil is drunk on love by the Creator's design. So the idea that the building blocks of our being saturated with love, and we need only to uncover it. That's the main, an essence of the Sufi path, that it's just about polishing, uncovering, revealing, unveiling, burning through the blockages, the attachments, and of course, what are these contortions of the ego? The defensiveness, the attachments to persona, the senses that we're nothing unless we're something, and then doing all these kinds of maneuvers to sort of prove this or that. This is all, ways of protecting a wounded self. And there's no denial of the wounds that we suffer in this life, in this philosophy, that our first wound is being separated from source, is the idea. But then within family, within childhood, within life. People are constantly being wounded, and then shields go up. But he says in this piece, in this one, he uses the word letafat, which means this silken thin scrim, this silky, delicate, gentle, permeable. So when he says shargashtamda letafat, I became hair thin, my armor, my shields, my walls, thin down to a silken scrim, and became sort of this permeable, right? Because, the big redwood tree is very strong, but the site of exchange happens in the most latif, the most delicate place, on the root hairs, right? So we are only going to feel this kind of energy that he speaks so much of, this shoreless, boundless love, when we open ourselves to it. And that's scary. There is a level of vulnerability there. There is a need to thin the armor. In another poem, for instance, he says, they say there's a wall between one heart and they say there's a door between one heart and another. How can there be a door where no wall remains? Right? So that space where no wall remains is latif. It is the site of exchange and growth and expansion. He says, an aching eye, seeing through pain. He speaks a lot about how are we seeing. Open your eyes, he says, open your eyes to the 4 streams flowing through you. Water, milk, honey, wine. Open your eyes to the 4 streams flowing through you. Water, milk, honey, wine. Pay no attention to what gossips say. They call the wide-eyed flower jasmine. They call the wide-eyed flower thorn. The wide-eyed flower doesn't care what they call it. I adore that freedom. I bow to it. Some say you worship fire. Some say you follow scripture. What do they know? Labels blind and tear us apart. Your eyes are not a vulture's teeth, a beak. Your eyes are not a vulture's beak. See through the beloved's eyes. See one when your mind says two. The angels adore your love-drunk eyes. Open them and dismiss the vicious judge from the post you gave him. Bow to a human and greet the angel. So that poem really is about how are we seeing? How are we seeing? How are we perceiving? Is how we are doing, how we are feeling, how we are moving through the world is based so much on the way that we see. So he believes we have different types of eyes. See through the beloved's eyes. See one when your mind says two. And when he says these 4 streams, water, milk, honey, wine, water, the cleansing, clarifying current running through us. When he says, for instance, grudges and spite weigh on the heart. Let me just find the correct poem so I don't misquote my own translation here. Let me find it. He says, grudges and spite weigh on the heart. Let 7 streams of water wash them away. Make room for love's wine. Be its cup. So a kind of visualization he's inviting us to do. Let 7 streams of water wash away the grudges and spite, right? Make room for love's wine. Be its cup. He says in another stanza in this poem, be a stranger to yourself. Wreck the house. And he really uses this word wreck. Sometimes even says pick up the axe and wreck the dungeon that you're in, right? So in this one, he says, be a stranger to yourself. Wreck the house you call self. Wake up in love's house. Live with lovers. Be a lover. So this idea that sometimes it's unfamiliar, moving into a different kind of zone or way of feeling, being, it can be unfamiliar and it feels strange. And he invites us, go ahead and try it. Try some radical generosity. See how it feels. For instance. Be compassionate to yourself. How does that feel? Be compassionate to someone who's driving you nuts. How does that feel? Right? Well, it does open us to laughter eventually, so it's worth it. Letting go of the ego is so fucking worth it, It's so worth it. This ego, this human ego, causes so much pain. Whether it's within a family or within on the global scale, we see it all the time. Really wretched, fearful people taking the reins on the world and legislating for millions of people, and it's so much an ego, megalomaniacal energy. So Maulana Rumi is speaking directly to that. He says in one poem, he says, this is not in gold, but it will be in the next volume, I believe. He says, world of water and mud, since I've known you, I've known 1,000 trials and tribulations, torments and tragedies. You are a pasture for grazing donkeys, not the abode of Jesus. Why should I be so intimate with a pasture for grazing donkeys? Why am I here? So this is, a moment where he expresses frustration. There's nothing fluffy about Rumi. There's nothing Pollyanna about Rumi, about him. He is aware that this world can be tough. And he says, the donkey in Persian culture is a symbol of ignorance. In the Bhagavad Gita, there's talk of how much ignorance there is on the planet. And sometimes it's frustrating, right? He feels frustrated by it. And he's not denying his own ignorance. He also, knows that we're all coming out of our ignorance, waking up, opening our eyes. But, it's frustrating to see the ego, the blind ego just wreaking havoc, So and causing so much trial and tribulation, torment and tragedy. And we torment ourselves with it. For instance, he says, Pambe vasvas birun kun zegush ta be gushat ayad az gardun khurush. Take the cotton of the mind's doom-ridden chatter. Take the cotton of the ego's doom-ridden chatter out of your ears. Hear the booming voice of the heavens. Hear the roar of fate. Hear the ruckus the muse makes. And when he silenced his own mind in this whirling, the poetry came through, and he was just sometimes, as I said, spouting it, and disciples were writing it down. So the ruckus the muse makes, the etheric voice, the gardun khurush, the khurush and the gardun has a few meanings. It's the booming voice of the heavens. So one can say that's a divine intelligence that can have some room to speak to us when we drop the doom-ridden narratives that become self-fulfilling prophecies, unfortunately, or can, but when we drop these narratives and this divine intelligence within and without can speak through us, we can hear some guidance, we can hear something out of the stillness come. That's beautiful, and it's a booming voice. It's so clear, he's saying. He also says the roar of fate, the idea that perhaps when we sit in this stillness, in this emptiness, in this empty mind, free of vasvas is that one word that means doom-ridden chatter, free of that and self-obsessed chatter, worried chatter. When we're free of that, we can hear more clearly perhaps fate. We hear the roar of fate. And he heard the muse, the ruckus the muse makes, the etheric voice. So going back to that poem, open your eyes to the four streams flowing through you, water, milk, honey, wine. So there's the water, the clarifying, cleansing water. The next current, water, milk, is milk. This idea, this nourishing current that we all have it within us. We all have the ability to nourish ourselves and each other, is the idea. Oh, it's milk, this nourishing current. In one poem, he says, rare king, true king, nourishing as mother's milk, come and dance. And I love that. I love this moment of looking at masculinity, the height of masculinity, the rare king, true king, nourishing as mother's milk, let it be so. Come and dance. Milk. Then we go to honey. Honey shows up all over the place. the sweetness, bringing in the sweetness. In one poem, there's a lot of imperatives in Rumi. He demands us, he both confesses. The reason we could take his demands, first of all, is they're so delightful in a way, and they're so poetic and aesthetically beautiful in the way he expresses himself. He's preaching to us. He was a preacher. He didn't lose that aspect of self. He brought it into poetry and found a way to preach in a way, I think, that is playful and beautiful and inviting. And because he's also confessing so much, we know him as a human, and I don't get irritated by his imperatives. So he says, for instance, if you've made a habit of drinking vinegar, don't blame the vine. Ditch the vinegar and ditch the vendor who doesn't deal in life's nectar. Pour love's wine and quit peddling misery. So I wish the leaders of Iran would hear that loud and clear. And the Basiji who support the military and the guards who support them. I wish they would hear that loud and clear. Ditch the vinegar and ditch the vendor who doesn't deal in life's nectar. Pour love's wine and quit peddling misery. So in this case, it's nectar and wine that he's mentioning. We were talking about the honey, the current of honey. Honey comes up, as a nectar, as this kind of just wonderful aspect of ourselves. For instance, salt, dry land blooms with tulips when you appear. Sour grapes sweeten, hungry for your lips. Last night in my dreams, I read your book of love. One chapter in, I was in ecstasy. Your revelations are wine. Your revelations are honey. We are cakes in a row, waiting for your touch. Sweeten any one of us, and our whole torn world tastes sweet. So that's just an excerpt from one, but there's a bit of the sweetness. Then we go to wine, and wine is all over the poetry. Love's wine, God's wine, the divine wine, the wine of revelation, the wine of compassion. And is it literal wine? Perhaps they were also drinking some wine. Some people will say, no, it's not. There's nothing literal about the wine at all. We're not 100% sure. There might have been a little bit of wine drinking, but in any case, most of all, yes, this is the wine of love, the agape, as they say in the is the 360 embrace, the loving of even enemies, right? In one poem, he says, this one is a great classic, I think. Let's love each other. Let's cherish each other, my friend, before we lose each other. You'll long for me when I'm gone. You'll make a truce with me. So why put me on trial while I'm alive? Why adore the dead, but battle the living? You'll kiss the headstone of my grave. Look, I'm lying here still as a corpse, dead as stone. Kiss my face instead. So it's kind of a sweet poem there. You'll long for me when I'm gone. You'll make a truce with me. So why put me on trial while I'm alive? Why adore the dead, but battle the living? You'll kiss the headstone of my grave. Look, I'm lying here, still as a corpse, dead as stone. Kiss my face instead. And death comes in a lot in his poetry. Befriending mortality. Important part of Sufi mysticism too. He says, I linked arms with death and leapt into the emptiness. The two things that we often fear most, death and emptiness. He says, don't. I'm linking arms, and this is with death of self, right? Death of self, the fana, ego death, but also the recognition that this body will also die someday, and that this enables us to live a richer existence. If we can accept it, recognize it, let ourselves shed some fear. He believes we are eternal. And so this is one chapter. And here's a poem where he brings in death towards the end. And it's the repeating phrase is laughter. In some of the poems, as I mentioned, the ghazals, they always end with the repeating phrase. But as in translation, sometimes the translator chooses to do the same. So in one poem, for instance, every stanza ends with come and dance, come and dance, come and dance, come and dance, or is here, is here, is here, is here. In this one, you can hear the refrain slinking through the poem. It just worked better that way in the translation. And again, you can think of a ghazal as a kind of series of independent couplets looking at different angles on, in this case, laughter. So there's no narrative, but a kind of leaping between the couplets. Your laughter turns the world to paradise. It tears through me like fire. It teaches me. Reborn in emptiness, I emerge laughing, here to learn from love new depths of laughter. I've been short on courage. There's a confession. I've been short on courage, but I have a heart of sunlight straight from the king's hand. I stir up laughter even in those who fear joy. Crack open my shell, steal the pearl. I'll still be laughing. It's the rookies who laugh only when they win. Crack open my shell, steal the pearl. I'll still be laughing. It's the rookies who laugh only when they win. Last night, the spirit of dawn came to my room and gave me a lesson in laughter. Our blazing roars lit the morning sky. When I brood like a rain cloud, laughter flashes through me. It's the habit of lightning to laugh through a storm. Look at the furnace, look at the stones. See the glowing red veins? Gold, laughing in fire, daring you. Prove you're no fake. Laugh even when you lose. We're fodder for death. So learn to laugh from the angel of death. He laughs at the jeweled belts and crowns of kings. All that splendor is just on loan. Treetop blossoms erupt in laughter. Petals rain down. Laugh like the bud of a flower hugging the ground. Its hidden smile opens to a laugh that lasts a lifetime. That laugh like the bud of a flower hugging the ground, its hidden smile, the way the bud smiles, that inner smile opens to a laugh that lasts a lifetime. So I feel like just reading two more and then we can turn to questions. There's so many in here that I'd really love to share, but I think I'm going to read, I mentioned a ghazal that ends with a repeating refrain. I'll read this one. The spring of souls is here. Fresh branch. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I didn't want to do that one. It's another one that starts with spring. That's also a good one. That's the one that ends with come and dance. Find it. So I'll read a different one. Here, it's spring, my friends. Let's make our home in the cypress grove and wake our sleepy destiny till it surges skyward like these trees. Aliens rising out of the grass. Just like them, we are bound to the ground, heading to groundless ground, where the soul flows nameless and free. Here, let's take our bound souls there. New leaf, you burst through the bark. Tell us how to break out of our cage. Cypress tree, you tunneled through darkness blind and blasted through the soil. What map was in your mind? Tell me, I'll follow. A flower steps out of its tight bud, gives its nectar, gives its gold. How do we do the same? Soft white stars of jasmine, sweet dizzying musk of jasmine. Where is your garden? I'll serve at the gate. And let love, the water of life, flow through our veins. Let a love-drunk mirror steeped in the wine of dawn translate night. Let a love-drunk mirror steeped in the wine of dawn translate night. You who pour the wine, put the cup of oneness in my hand and let me drink from it until I can't imagine separation. Love, you are the archer. My mind is your prey. Carry my heart and make my existence your bullseye. آب حیات عشق را در رگ ما روانه کن روانه کن روانه کن. Okay. Yeah, well, I think one thing that a translator has to do is let go of the music of the original language. And that's sometimes sad. For instance, when he says, and this is a poem I like to recite a lot because the rhythm and rhyme are so apparent. یار مرا قار مرا عشق جگر خار مرا یار توی قار توی خواجه نگهدار مرا دان توی دام توی باد توی جام توی پخت توی خام توی خام به مگذار مرا حجره خورشید توی خانه ناهید توی روزه امید توی راه ده یار مرا روز توی حاصل در یوز توی آب توی کوز توی آب دهیم بار مرا. Okay, so that's just a segment of a poem. And you can hear the rhythm, the internal rhyme, the external rhyme. All right, let go of that. Why? Because to try and rhyme in that way, internal, external, there's going to be compromise of meaning. And to me, it's much more important to offer the image as he's describing, as he's creating it, rather than trying to find rhyming words or rhythmic words. Okay, so that's a simple thing, and that's not surprising choice. Though some people do get very attached to rhyme because it is so prevalent in his poetry. Words like fana, which means, which is often translated as ego death, but it means more than that. This is about dissolving the stifling aspects of the egoic self in a sea of compassion. So central to Fana is this shoreless, boundless sea of love that he talks about. So we cannot transmute, we cannot transform without that love truly coming in as a force. And so when translating, for instance, a word Fana, one has to open it up and unpack it to give the meaning, right? Because we don't have that one-to-one equivalent in English. The word Haman shows up a lot. Haman means the raw ones, or just ham, raw. I said it in one of the poems, for instance, he said, raw and callow. I followed the ones already cooked by love's fire, right? So he wanted to learn. He followed the ones already cooked by love's fire. He knew himself as ham, raw. He says, when he summarizes his life, he says, I was raw, I was cooked, I was burned up. And so this movement is something that he celebrates, to be burned up, right? We talked about the scattering of smoke at the beginning. But how to bring the word raw forward, how to bring the emptiness forward, the luminous void, right? Beyond profit and loss, wonder abounds beyond fear of loss and lust for gain. So sort of like these mystical concepts sometimes are inside one word. When he says the Haman, these are the ones who are raw still. And I translated the word as, you could translate it as the raw ones, the uncooked ones, the callow ones, the newbies, the amateurs, the rookies. I chose rookies in one of the poems because he's talking about winning and losing, and the idea of the rookie as involved in a competitive and even sometimes militaristic, the word has those connotations, was useful, and serves the meaning. So the ones who are, the rookies at life, the rookies at the game of existence, who haven't realized, how much of the gold, why is this book called Gold? The gold comes through dissolution of ego. That's the real gold, is the feeling state that arises from that alchemical process. So how to put these sort of concepts into the poem is sometimes a challenge, because we can't just say fana. If I just say ego death, it's not enough. So I enjoy that process. Actually, it's delightful. It's challenging, and it's also fun. There's a word oud. Oud means, one of the definitions of it is incense. And so most people don't know what aloes wood. Most people don't know aloes wood. So it was fun to unpack aloes wood and to say what it smells like. So I chose as the translator to unpack it a little bit and to say the honeyed musk of amber fruit and flower, right? Because that's what you would smell if you were inhaling aloes wood. So sometimes there's an invitation to unpack and offer what's inside the word to the audience that doesn't know those words. Then there are words, I sat with my mother and read the ghazals aloud with her and read the quatrains aloud with her. And sometimes we looked into dictionaries that had ancient and obscure meanings. That was also part of the process. So sometimes the challenge is in the words that were used 800 years ago that might have had a different meaning. So then investigating that was important. I hope that answers the question partially. Well, just let's say, for instance, hyperbole, I mean, this is a very specific example, but he often uses like thousands, hundreds and thousands. He uses those words and just sometimes dealing with that. My editor specifically didn't like the thousands and hundreds of thousands when he says that. But it came across, countless gardens. When he says towering cypress of countless gardens. But sorry, it's escaping me. And just, in English, we don't have as many praise poems. We're not as familiar with the praise poem. So when he says, friend, cave, love that consumes me, you are the friend of my soul, lift me up. You are spirit, savior, slain, slayer, inside your chest. Mysteries stand inside your heart. Mysteries stand naked. Press my ear to your chest. This kind of intense praise poetry is something that has a hyperbolic aspect to it. For instance, when he says, "Salt, dry land blooms with tulips when you appear. Sour grapes sweeten, hungry for your lips." There's a romantic hyperbole there. But I think that when playing with the words and engaging with the sparse and concrete sort of way and crispness of contemporary American poetry, it can work well. Taking out lots of ofs, there's lots of ofs in Persian, because when the word ends with it's an of. So then working with, again, this crispness and sparseness of contemporary American poetry that can figure out ways of losing the ofs. You know what I mean? Yeah, there's two poems actually that have a kind of movement from the left to the right of the page, left to the right of the page. And the first one, it starts colorless, nameless, free, that's what I am. And that's the soul talking. And then the self says, where is the middle? In the middle I am. And the soul says, put mystery in the middle. I'm sorry, no, whoops. Colorless, nameless, free, that's what I am. When will I see myself as I am? The ego says, wah, and the soul says, put mystery in the middle. The unfathomable, right? Put mystery in the middle. Where's the middle? In the middle I am, and this silver tongue stream in me, when will it grow still enough to know the streaming stillness I am? The ocean I am, drowned in the ocean I am, shoreless, boundless, wonderful. And it goes on from there. But this kind of dialogue, in the actual poem, there's gofti, which means you said, right? I said, you said. I took that out and just kind of made it a dialogue on the page. I didn't feel like we needed the you saids, for instance. So that was one of the reasons that I broke up the poem that way, was to give you a sense that, and I think it is clear, you know, there's a point at which the ego says, my soul, you are my true eyes. And then the soul says, what are eyes in the invisible, visible I am? Then what do I call you? Silence. Words can't name what I am. Then praise the wordless speaker I am. I race through emptiness, footless like the moon. Praise the footless runner I am. Why are you running? To reach me? Settle in the nowhere, everywhere I am. Settle in the placeless place I am. So this kind of dialogue, that was one of the choices there. In another one of the poems, it's the, again, a kind of, you know, was the one I read earlier, full of self, and then forget yourself, and then caged in self, and then outside of self, and then self-conscious, and then melt yourself. So these two, again, possibilities, kind of like the spectrum that I was talking about between nafsa ammara and nafsa mutmaina, is just kind of trying to show that on the page a little bit in those two poems. And I'll say this, there are incredible Iranian vocalists who sing the poetry of Maulana Rumi. Shahram Nazari, Parisa, Shajarian, there's so many. And, you know, there aren't necessarily set melodies. Often people ask me, are there set melodies? No, people compose their own, and it lends itself to music because, you know, he was often writing while music was playing. So there was a beat, and he was a master of rhythm. So it lends itself to singing, and vocalists will take maybe a 16 couplet ghazal and pick 4 of their favorite couplets and create a song based on that. So anyway, I will humbly share one of my little melodies. I wish I had my guitar with me because I would play the one that I'd actually really like to play, but I need the guitar for that one. So I'll just sing this one. Okay. آمد این بهار جانها ای شاخ تر برقصا از پا و سر بریدی بی پا و سر برقصا بی پا و سر برقصا ای مست هست گشته بر تو فنا نبشته روغ فنا رسیده بهر سفر برقصا بهر سفر برقصا. Well, yeah, no, that melody is not something taught or no, it's not. That actually, that particular melody actually was one that was a part of a nohe. A nohe is like an Islamic chant, and it had religious lyrics in it. And then I found a Rumi poem that kind of fit like a glove syllabically, and I decided to try singing that with Rumi's lyrics just for fun. You know, but again, one can do anything with these in terms of creating melody. It's open field, and certainly many of the Iranian artists and musicians, you know, play with these poems constantly and create beautiful, beautiful compositions. Yeah. Well, first of all, yes, what you just ended with, that sometimes the love is seen as fire, sometimes as the ocean. So the fire that's burning through aspects of the stifled self, the drowning in the sea of love. The love is the archer, the love is the whale that swallows both worlds. Love is the force that, heals and mends and unclenches the fist and lets the soul breathe. Love lets the soul breathe. So this, there are many, many ways that he speaks of love, and he uses different metaphors for it. And you spoke of eros and filio, and then of course there's agape, which I would say that agape is closest to this idea of the 360-degree embrace of creation. Agape being this grand love that encompasses all, and says, I accept and love this all. I'm grateful for this all, and for even the challenges, and for even the enemies, I'm here to be here in a state of compassionate witness and love. This is agape. This is the love he speaks of. And you said something else that I wanted to respond to, and I'm not remembering at the moment.
This relationship to Shams.
Oh, yes.
A human being and more.
A human being, exactly. And also to the sensual world, right? So to Shams, his beloved friend, his guide, his mentor, his muse. Yes, through this friendship, this love experience that some say was romantic. I'm not going to say if it was or wasn't. I mean, sometimes these poems seem very erotic and romantic. Now, this idea that this experience of love with a human being, whatever form it is, this love can bring us to a larger love, right? That this love is kind of a portal for our awakening. That exists, that idea exists, and that the divine is within and the divine is within another, and that through you, I see the divine, through this shared experience, through this mystical conversation, because they went into sohbats, they sat together for months and talked, and through that experience of sharing and having a connection to these texts and to these mystical ideas and sharing, going back and forth and laughing, there was a creative fountain of love and wonder and delight, and then with the sensual world, with the birds, with the nightingales, he speaks of them all the time. And soft white stars of jasmine, sweet dizzying musk of jasmine, where's your garden? I'll serve at the gate. And he says, dear nightingale, flowers delight you, you delight us. How do we pass on the favor? So he wants to see himself as part of this stream of giving, that he sees happening in nature. So he absolutely embraced the sensual world. Some people say that the mystics are always up in the ether, but no, it is the sensual world, the relationship with each other and with this natural world that opens us to the divine as well. And our moments of deep silence, emptiness, in which grace comes in, and those times. So it's the multiplicity of these experiences that allows us, I think, to start to experience this feeling state, which is the gold of existence, right? According to him. And it's just the continuation of this work. I can't stop this work. It's too delightful. It's too wonderful. These poems are nourishing. They are truly nourishing for me. In the 6 years, I heard them as a child growing up. My father would recite them. Yek khane porz mastan, mastan norisidan, divanegane bandi zanjirha daridand. He would recite that poem, which is about the mastan, the intoxicated ones. And it says, the house overflows with drunkards, more come knocking. Crazed, but still bound, they tore off their chains, right? So that's part of it. But this idea, my dad was talking about the ecstatic ones. And I didn't understand the meanings. I didn't even care about the fact that I was Iranian for most of my life. No, that's not true. Not for most of my life. But around the age of 20, I started to turn my eye back to my own culture. And since then, now it's been quite a while, and particularly the last 6 years, when I decided to really dive into the translation. Translation is the most intimate way that I've known his poems, because I heard them from my dad. Then I read the English translations, American translations, which kind of pointed me back. Then I started singing some, and then diving in. As a translator, you have to eat the poems. So I've had the nourishment of the poems, and I don't want to stop.
For attending.
Yeah, thanks,
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah, thanks everybody.